deeply Jewish book. James was a dyed-in-the-wool Jewish believer. He was talking to the early church, which would have been a very, very Jewish church. They wouldn't see faith, the Christian faith, quite the way we do, because they saw it as an extension of what they grew up with, while we see it as something a little bit different. It means a lot of the stuff that we came across, it was taken for granted by the readers at the time, but for us, we might have to dig a little to get the full implications. Chapter 1 was an amazing chapter that gave the whole book in a nutshell, and then he expands on it. But in that, he ends up really prefacing the whole book. It's about pure religion that is faultless before the Father. How would you like that? If you knew the way you worship in your Christianity and your faith was actually faultless before God. That's quite a statement. He started with something pretty simple. It was to really take care of the needy and remain unpolluted by the system or the world. And then everything that follows the end of chapter 1 is still the same chapter. It's here's still pure religion. It's still pure wisdom. He uses the two words interchangeably. Chapter 2 then, in this pure religion, we looked at faith and deeds. You know what? Faith is necessary. But faith that has no outward actions is pretty well useless. It isn't too much of a thing to have. So he went into that. Now we're in chapters 3 and 4 this morning, and we move deeper into this idea of pure religion, and then building on the idea of you having faith, and building on the idea of your outer actions. And we end up, and he talks about the tongue, a whole bunch. The tongue in the first parts of these chapters. And we're talking about our mouths, but we're not talking about our mouths. We're talking about something a whole lot deeper in there. But he does this amazing thing through this chapter. He uses the tongue like a hinge point. There it is, your metaphor, your analogy, the tool by which everything gets done. And then part of his letter that he's writing to this church goes outward, and then he goes back to the tongue, and then he goes inward. And so we get two very distinct points being made, outwards and inwards. So let's do that. Let's start with the tongue going outward. And not surprising, we're not really talking about the tongue. We're talking about what the tongue can do, and that's produce words. So here we are. There's an unknown author of a quote that goes like this: "The tongue has no bones, but is strong enough to break a heart. So be careful with your words." Be careful with your words. And as he starts launching into this thing with words, he starts with the whole idea of teachers. Not surprising. "Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways." Why start with teachers of all things? Well, because teachers tend to do what I'm doing right now. I'm shooting out a whole bunch of words. And how I string them together is pretty important. It's not the most important thing, but it's right up there. And we'll see why as we go along, that there are things deeper even than the words. And yes, there's a whole lot of reasons with words, because, I could say one thing and do another. And if I said, and I gave you the perfect message today, never missed a point in what we're talking about in James, and then you find out by tomorrow that my words, I don't live anything like my words, what does that do to the power of my words? Or remember, here's one of those things I was telling you, that James was deeply Jewish. And so when he was thinking of teacher, the first thing that would come to his mind would be rabbis. Rabbi. Interesting term, rabbis. It actually means my great one. So I was telling Chris, I said, we're going to change things. But from now on, Chris and I will be known as my great one, Chris. So, Kelly says, no, that's not going to happen. But imagine this. Put yourself in their place. Here's how lofty the position of rabbi was. One, you were known as my great one. And your words were, people hung on your words, what you said. Your position was so important that in the Jewish law, etiquette, whatever, should your family be taken ransom, and people sometimes would have rabbis in their homes, and they would stay with them. It was a great privilege to have a rabbi stay in your home. But say an enemy came and abducted your family and happened, they got the rabbi as well in this hostage situation. It was your duty to free the rabbi even before your own family. So these guys were, pretty high up there on the old ladder of status. But what does that do to a person when, as a teacher, people do hang on your words, or you would have this lofty position? What does that tend to do to a person's ego? We said, we were talking in the first service, we said, what if we became known as my great one? And somebody said, you might start to believe it. And that's the point, isn't it? Is that teaching is a very dangerous place. It can corrupt people. It can twist their motives. It can do a lot of things. So teachers have to be careful, and they are held to a higher standard. But here's the thing, we're all teachers too. I guarantee you somebody has learned something from you. And since you're in here as professing Christians, my guess is that they learned something about Christ from you. So we're all in that boat to some level. As he goes on in this chapter, though, he talks about the tongue. We're looking outward, and he uses a few analogies. He talks about a horse bit. He talks about a ship's rudder. And he talks about a spark. And what's really amazing is that each of these analogies build on the other. And we have quite a picture by the time we're done. Well, it starts with the fact of riding on a horse. And he talks about, if you look in, I think it's in your guide sheets, or as you saw on the screen, the idea that this tiny little metal thing. How many people in here have or ridden a horse at some point in their life? Okay, that's most of us. So you know what we're talking about, that little smooth piece of metal. It can be actually different sizes than that bit in a horse's mouth. And it can turn the whole animal. And we said, what do you think we're learning here? And we said, well, for a start, something very small changes the direction of something very big. And that something very big can be very powerful. All from this small thing like a tongue. And as I was looking at this, I was trying to remember the name of a horse. When Katie was young, she got into riding, and quite frankly, I said, hey, if you're learning, I'm learning. And we went and we learned together, and we rode a lot. Kathy came a few times with us. But we went to this place where we rented horses for a long time. It was a great place. I had a favorite horse called Buck that he used to ride. He was still quite young then. Sad story with Buck. Somebody later broke him in wrong, and it was sad. But he was a great horse at this time. He was big, and Buck, when he would gallop, had 3 gears. I never saw a horse. I mean, literally, I think it was just like it were shifting in this thing. And if you gave him the bit a little bit, he would be, oh, we're going faster. And so he had gear 1. And then if you kept giving him the bit, giving him the rein, he'd say, oh, we're getting serious, are we? And he would take up a pretty considerable trot going on there. But then he had the 3rd gear. When you really left the reins for, then he had the 3rd gear, and it was you will die immediately if you fall off me at this speed. Your hair is on fire. Man, this animal, he is moving. If you were out there in your Lamborghini, I would have been going by, and I was just on this horse really fast. So this horse really would travel in this 3rd gear. The trick of the thing was, though, slowing down. Because he was a big animal. He wasn't a little horse. This is a big guy. And when you want to slow him down, it was like the heels back in the stirrups and the reins, with your arms straining. I mean, it took something. And he was just like this, as if, like this little bit, if you let him go, man, could he go in a direction really fast. And I don't know what we were thinking. Kathy came out for one of her guest appearances, and I said, why don't you ride my favorite horse? Well, she made the mistake of hitting third gear, and boy, it was tense for all of us for a while because nothing could catch him. But it was like this, and words are like that. Once they get free, they're hard to rein in, if not outwardly impossible. So the idea of a horse and a bit is the power from this little thing. And we move on to the idea of a ship and a rudder. And keep in mind, once again, we're not thinking our time, we're thinking of James's time. Well, ships were a big deal. There were no railroads or anything like that. Ships were the way you got people and cargo around. Ships were important. But what else do we know about ships back in this day? It was kind of a risky affair, wasn't it? These wooden boats. If you happened to sail at the wrong time, in the wrong season, in the wrong direction maybe, well, we know what would happen to them. They ended up shipwrecked. Paul was shipwrecked how many times? Actually, that's good. If somebody would have yelled out something like 7, I would have been like really impressed, but I'm not sure. I'm not going to say. But ships were very tenuous. You could end up shipwrecked if that rudder happened to take you somewhere you shouldn't be going. And there's going back and forth between Steve and Chris in the first, we really came up with the idea, thinking about that too, is that all this cargo and all these people were on it. And Steve says, I'm thinking of Jonah. And he says, yeah, you're right. Your destiny was on that ship. If it goes the wrong way, you could end up shipwrecked somewhere. But it wasn't just you. It was everybody else involved with you who was on that ship. And not just you and those people, but all that cargo, all those goods that belonged to us, all this welfare was on this ship. The damage you can do if you happen to turn that little rudder the wrong way. So we have destiny builds up on it, and then we end up with a spark. Sparks are kind of interesting things. How hard is it to control a spark? Ever have a fire, you get a little ember burning, or your match just before it's go? Spark's not too hard to control, is it? Now let's think of what would come to James's mind. Israel, especially ancient Israel, made its main economy from livestock, grazing pastures. Anybody ever have dry grass and decide to burn their lawn in the spring? Maybe that's you and me, Mike. I said that was maybe a Canadian thing. We waited for the snow to melt off. Man, we were as kids. We were lighting everything. Just burning it down. But in Israel, when you have fields that go on for miles, and you have brush, and it's all dry, you drop a match, and a fire starts in that field. Chances are you will not outrun the brush fire. It'll probably get you before you get out of that field. So there was something very, very scary about sparks and dry grass and brush. It could burn things down, including you. It could do a lot of stuff. Thought of, say, when I was doing this, I don't know if you noticed when we were looking at the pictures, anybody catch where it was talking about the verses of fire? The picture with the 2 little kids running across the river? Well, that was the Amazon, the fires that were going on there. It's a picture from there. And there's a case of what happens. What would happen globally if we lost the Amazon? It would affect every environmental system in the world. Our air quality would be, greatly affected. So the idea of a spark getting free and doing that kind of damage, James 3, starting in verse 5, he says, consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and it itself set on fire by hell. If James was wary in ancient days, what about our day? Wow, if a word, what can we do nowadays with a word or a picture? Try and get that back on social media. You know what? Even for what we can do in mass media, the dynamic's still the same. The wrong word, the reckless word, the hurtful word still does the same thing as it always did. It's a spark that you cannot get back. So here's James. First he says, I want you to understand this. I want to understand the power of what's coming out of your tongue and into the world. I said, we got that down. Okay, now let's go back to the tongue and let's change direction. Where are those words coming from? Well, the tongue's the delivery system, but the tongue doesn't come up with the words. James 3:9, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth comes praise and cursing. Stop and think about that for a minute. Out of the same mouth comes praise and cursing. And that cursing doesn't just mean profanity. You understand what he's saying. Here he's talking about malevolence towards other people. Does that happen to us? Out of the same mouth comes praise and cursings. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Well, why not, James? Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? It's what forms the nature of our words. How do we string those words together? We have a saying, don't we? Engage brain before mouth is in gear. Ever use that saying? Well, yeah, the tongue says stuff, but it's connected to your brain, to your mind. You think things before you say them. There's processing going on in this spring we're talking about. And this is nothing new. Remember we said James brought everything to a nutshell in chapter 1. Remember back in chapter 1 we learned a motto for life? Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to be angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. I still put that out. I think we went back and forth, but it's a fun question to kick around. I said, I'm yet to see righteous anger. I don't believe I've ever showed it, and I don't believe, at least firsthand, I've ever seen it displayed. The only place I've seen it was from God himself. Anger's a bad thing, and when the tongue gets to work from anger, it's even worse. So here we are, we're starting inward. We go to the mind and what's going on in the mind. And there are words we have like mindset or mentality. When I say mindset, you know where I'm going. It's that default that's in us. Here's a question to even ask yourself. When you first meet someone, what is your mindset? Do you look at them and first go, okay, what's wrong with that person that they might cause me trouble later? Or what skills, what strengths does this person have that I might see in operation and see them hopefully in a hopeful way? Everybody looks at everybody else, and you are first positive or negative in your approach to that person. I'm not saying what you think of them. I'm saying your approach and how you look at other people. For some people, their mindset, their default is to be angry. If something's happening, well, let's take this. You're driving on the highway and somebody cuts you off a little bit. You may have one of two defaults. You may be of what's wrong with that so-and-so, and they're the worst person in the world and you're really upset with them. Or it could be, man, somebody's having a bad day and you cut them a little slack or some other way. Your default is first to either be angry or to be a peacemaker. We all may be known. Chances are, wouldn't that be interesting to know? If you could go out and take a survey of everyone who knows you and just have that question on there, would you say this person stirs anger or is a peacemaker? I wonder what they would say about you. I wonder what they'd say about me. But there's a mindset going on there. There's a default you go to. So you know what? What I'm pointing at is that the mind processes a whole bunch of stuff before you speak, and that's you're going to say what you're going to say as you string the words together. But the mind isn't the root of everything. The mind has yet something else it attaches to. We call it the heart. We're kind of getting to the source of the spring here, aren't we, a bit? And we think of the heart as the thing that sets the nature of all those defaults we're talking about. It's that source of the spring, but it's not the ultimate source of the spring. There's actually yet another layer. Because for all you feel in your heart can change. You can have a change of heart. The way you feel about some things is maybe set or colored or flavored or founded on something else. And I think that's what James may be getting at, because he adds to the analogy. In James 3:12, he says, "My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water." There's something at the root that the heart assimilates stuff, but even before it absorbs things, there's something that causes it to absorb what it does absorb. In the Greek, they use two words. Spirit and soul weren't the same word, but we tend to merge them together, and we talk about the essence of something or the essence of a person. It's what you are. It's what you are inside, not just how you feel, not just the way you tend to think, not the words you say particular, but what you are at your very self. Ever meet someone you just kind of go, man, that's a dark person. There's just something that's really, really malevolent in there all the way to the core. Or you may meet someone else and say, that's one of the kindest people I've ever met. There's something that's really beneficial. So if we dig back, you've got this where James has changed the directions. You had the words that were coming out, but the words, that tongue is attached to the brain, and the mind is attached to the heart and the feelings that we tend to have, but then the heart is attached to that essence or spirit of an individual, the very nature. And this has some serious implications when we think of how deep words come from in the essence of things. Now, where James was going was if you took that olive tree or whatever, why does it produce figs? If you thought of figs as the words or the effect of the words, because it's a fig tree. Everything about it is a fig tree, right to the core. Go in and take a cell out, check the DNA in that cell. It is a fig tree. That's what it is. So not surprising, it produces figs. Well, what if there was a tree and you didn't know what it was and it produced apples? Well, chances are you go, at the very core, that is an apple tree. That's what it is. And that's the way we are. Here's a truth I couldn't stress enough. Is, sin is a nature. Is that we talk about, committing this sin or that sin is like, yes, Scripture will use the word that way, but that's really just a manifestation of what's going on inside you or me. Sin is a nature, the fallen nature, that version of darkness that we all have, and the sin nature abides in the Spirit. And not surprising then, what's in there just works its way up and comes all the way out. Well, let's say your takeaway so far is, I've seen how dangerous words are. I know they can burn the forest down. They can burn a life down. And so if I want to control my words, first thing I'm going to do is control my mind. And you can discipline your mind. I think we could all learn. Put brain in gear before using mouth. A little tough, but we could all do that. And we might even say, I need to have a change of heart on some things. And you listen to motivational tapes and get all inspired. You probably can have a change of heart as well. However, now let's go back to what kind of a tree are you? And we go back to the very essence of who you are, the very core of who you are. See, because this is working in two directions. We said everything you are, it starts in the very essence of who you are and works its way up out your mouth. And so that's what produces your words. But if that's true, then your words are an indicator of what? Your spirit. What is going on in that spirit? So if ultimately that is what has to change in order to change the words, how does one change their spirit? Can you do it? Nobody's sure. They're not saying anything. God can do that. Well, that's not a bad answer. God can do that. But there's a word probably missing from that answer. I'm just really putting you to the test. What might be added to God can do that to make it the full truth? Okay, God will do it. Okay, good luck for you if you can do your spirit. What I would say is this: God can do it is good, but the full truth is this: only God can do it. No one can transform their own spirit. You can't do it. How do you know? Well, because, that's what that's all about. It takes the designer to change the design. It takes God Himself to change you. As we speak about the Trinity and we speak about the perfect community of God, you have the Father and you have the Son and you have the Holy Spirit. And the idea is, I will be in the Father and the Father in me, and you will be in me, and the Father will be in you. It has to get all the way back to God transforming in the Spirit, or it won't work. Not really. You may put a Band-Aid on it, but it has to be transformative. That's why even as we're in here now, hear this, if any of it's true and you go, well, that makes sense, well, that's great, but it means absolutely nothing unless we strive and open to have the Spirit of God Himself within us. It goes back there. That's where James is going with this. He says, well, I'll even give you some examples. James says, take a look at your words. Take the net effect of how your words and where they're coming from. Do they come from selfish ambition? Do they come where the net effect of them is actually stirs up more hatred than cures? Or do they actually allow you to bring healing to people? Or uplift people? What are your words doing? What are they doing? Rabbis had an interesting term. They said, when somebody spoke with bad words, they said, you slipped on your mouth. How often do we slip on our mouth? Well, the indication is, and this is where it's really going, this is the takeaway, is if you want to know the state of your soul, the state of your very spirit, a large indicator is the words that come out of your mouth. That's by James' reasoning. Transformed spirit, transformed words. No transformed words, then we have a problem. Or even worse, mixed curses and blessings. Let me just tell you where he was coming from with that really quickly. He was talking about something that the Jewish Christians did. They had a set of prayers where they'd pray a set of these 18 prayers 3 times a day. And each prayer began with, "Blessed be thou, O Lord." And they would go through this. So it was possible that you could be praying, you could be a good Jewish believer, and even as a Christian, a good Jewish Christian believer, and say these 18 prayers, and then turn around and the first person you see when you're going out the door, you dress them down or say something mean. You curse them in some way. Pretty easy. Isn't it great that never happens in the church anymore? There's nobody in the church anymore who will raise a praise in church and then go out and say something bad to or about someone else. Boy, I'm glad that never happens anymore, right? Well, maybe we shouldn't feel too bad because, James is writing to who? The church. And he spends 2 whole chapters talking to them about this problem with the tongue. Maybe this is a pretty old problem in the church. But the answer is still the same. The answer is still the same. The transformation goes back not just with your mind, not even just with your heart. It goes all the way back to the Spirit, all the way back to the essence of who you really are, who only God can transform. We open to it. We've got our place. We looked at faith and deeds, but only God transforms. So we actually open to let that happen. As far as questioning or challenges in that, I just leave it with that idea. What do your words say about your soul? What do your words say about your soul? It's all in there. There's the challenge from James. This one should be pretty easy. James is a practical book, so when we looked at the next step cards, these are right out of James. Make an effort to think before you speak, maybe even pray. Uplift somebody with your words. What is the purpose of the church? Heal someone with your words. How would that work? You know your scenarios in life. Is there someone that you could just say the right encouragement or the right forgiveness or say the right string of words that would actually heal something in their life? That's some serious power. Quench a dangerous spark of words. Wow, we could go anywhere with that one. And here's the biggie. It's going back to David and searching ourselves. If you take everything that comes out of your mouth and you turn it over to God and you say, God, here it is. Here's the indicator of my soul. What state is my soul really in? Because you might sit there and you might think, oh, it is great. I'm doing well. Maybe God sees things the same, but maybe He has a few things He wants to reveal to you about the state of your soul.